So I'm going to ask Amy Martin to come up to the table now to work through some slides on the resident survey, who we heard from, what the key messages were, what you may wish to take away in terms of changes to the draft annual plan. Amy works for the Monitoring and Research team in Strategic Planning and Policy, and I will let her drive her way through this. I'm happy to click through for you.
Perfect, thank you. So, I will just preface this with what you're about to see isn't everything that we heard in submissions. This is really just the high-level key messages that we pulled out of the 500 that we did receive. So the thematic document that is attached to this agenda has the more detailed information in it. So we received 518 submissions this year. 434 of those were from individuals and 83 were from organisations, and it represents around 0.13% of the total population. So light annual plan and light submissions. Who did we hear from? So this is just some basic demographics around the submitters. As we see in a lot of our other consultations and research, we are particularly light on the under 34 years, under 18s in particular. 35 to 49 and 50 to 64, we actually were reasonably okay. We're on the cusp there of it being representative of that total population, and then 65 and over, we were bang on, so that's good. Ethnicity, not everyone responded to this question, so what we've got here is just what we received, and they didn't have to respond. You can see that we were pretty well under in everyone but other Europeans, so there's some work to be done there if we want to improve who we're hearing from. In terms of the key messages, when it comes to rates, it was really around we want to see you get the balance right, and you can see that in 44% of the submitters who commented on rates supported what we were proposing and 44% opposed, so a dead even split there, and 17 provided other proposals or feedback outside of what we've proposed in the annual plan. So get the balance right, spend enough that you can still continue on the projects that are important to us and we want to see moving forward, but also we're really concerned about the ongoing burden on ratepayers and households, particularly with the high cost of living at the moment, and we'd like to see that balance in there. In terms of our planned spending and comments on that, it was reasonably similar to rates around the balance, getting the balance right, spending enough to get those projects done, but not increasing that burden. There were a couple of specifics that came up there, including our spending in the east, so spending more on the basic infrastructure out there predominantly, and also Phillipstown, which I think you heard in hearings as well. So in terms of spending and where they want to see more spending, there was really a message that they were feeling a little frustrated by our spending on perceived nice to haves when some communities out there are fighting really hard for improvements in basic infrastructure in their areas. And with what I mentioned about the east before, we're feeling a little frustrated that you seem to be forgetting about some parts of the city. So there's that real underlying sense there that spending is happening in some areas of the city, but perhaps not others where they'd like to be seeing it happen. In terms of specific areas where they'd like to see more spending, we got 157 submissions on roads. You can see that 89% of those are sitting in the other category. That was really dominated by the submissions on Milne, Sutherlands and the east, so there was a lot of other proposals that came through in that. Footpaths and streetscapes, which was really around improving the condition of footpaths and some safety improvements in specific areas. Cycleways, so we saw 44% of the submitters on cycleways supported what we've proposed and 43% provided other proposals. Those who support really appreciate what we're doing and commenting that they are feeling safe in our cycling through the city, which is what we're trying to achieve. But the 43% are really around local connections to make it safer to get to that major cycleways network and just improving those local connections and infrastructure in areas where there currently isn't any. Parks, it was really around upgrades and improvements to the current parks as opposed to new ones. So playgrounds were a big one this year, and toilet facilities. And then community facilities, there was a few submissions, and again, they were largely in that other category, so proposing other bits and pieces that we haven't got in the annual plan. So one of the key messages that we heard both last year in the LTP and this year in the annual plan is local facilities are really important to our community. So we got 170 submissions on the proposed Edgware Pool spend. 94% of those supported the proposal, 4% opposed, and 2% provided other views or proposals. So there was a really clear message from that community that they really want to see this project happen. It's important to them, and there was a lot of stories around memories of summers at the pool in those submissions. The other one that we heard again last year in the LTP and then again this year was we want to partner with you. And then this year it was really around on creative ways to provide community spaces, and the focus there was on the land in Gloucester Street for the Performing Arts Precinct. So there was a proposal that came through on that, and it had a lot of support, and again you heard that through the hearings. So we're getting clear messages from year to year that we really appreciate those and value those local facilities, and we want to partner with you on different ways of doing things. Climate change. So this year we got 28 submissions on climate change, and while most of them agreed that we've made a good start, most of them also thought that we could probably go further, and they want to see us being more bold with that action. And a lot of that related back to our spending in other areas as well. So some of the cycleways stuff that you saw in the previous slide and what I'm about to get to in terms of tree canopy. So this isn't normally an annual plan topic, but it's been put in here because it did come through quite clearly, and it's a good litmus test of the mood out there, and that's that we're concerned about what the future looks like for the communities and areas that we live in. And that was really around those medium density residential standards and the impacts that they're going to have on neighbourhoods, but also the tree canopy. And there was a lot of comments around the tree canopy in terms of this is one of the ways that we can mitigate the impacts of climate change as these start to come to the fore. So there's a relationship between those two things. And just briefly on the resident survey. So this is this year's results. 2/3 of the levels of service that we measured across both the point of contact and general service satisfaction surveys met their target. 1/3 didn't. And in the higher performing, more satisfied services, you can see that there is some consistencies, and the lower with what we saw in the annual plan submissions. So walk-in and phone customer services, event support, libraries, botanic gardens in Mona Vale, regional parks, cemeteries, Hagley Park, and recreation and sports services, the bus interchange and the Riccarton Bus Lounge all met the 85 plus satisfaction mark this year. So those are the services that those residents really value and have told us that. The ones that have lower satisfaction are around decision making and having a say in the processes, being easy to use, understanding the decision-making process and how residents can influence that, on-street parking, water supply and quality, stormwater, and again, the condition of the roads and footpaths, which we saw in the annual plan submissions as well. So in a nutshell, that's what we heard, but the thematic analysis does have a lot more detail in it.
The full thematic analysis is on LinkedIn Can for you. It goes into a lot more detail than this one. I will just mention that you've heard this before. The submitters are not a representative sample of the city. That's not to denigrate the quality of their input, rather just to say that they're not a representative group. And the comments and analysis applied here is not about whether their feedback is factually true. We're simply trying to analyse what they've told you, rather than drawing any judgment about whether they're right or wrong. So with those two caveats, I guess, are there any questions in relation to what the community is telling us?
Yeah. Sorry, Aaron and then Jake. Yeah, on the breakdown of those that supported and opposed the way we spend the money, which I think is 43 each, or 43 all.
Oh, the rates one, 44 each.
44. So on that, are you able to break that down by area? Because it's very easy to ask for the council to spend more money when you don't pay much rates, but when your rates are exorbitant, then you might not be asking the council to increase your rates a lot.
So we did do some breakdowns by areas, and I haven't included them in here because not everyone provided an address that we could geocode. So those breakdowns wouldn't necessarily be representative of everyone who commented on that, and we didn't want to skew what that might be saying with data that we weren't comfortable presenting for that. So that's why they're not there. We can, but the address thing, we managed to get, I think, close to 70% of them. So there's still a third of people who submitted that we don't have addresses for.
So of this, given that it's a non-representative number, but it's just all numbers, then of the 70%, did we see where they sat?
Yes, but there wasn't anything clear in there in terms of spend more money. And the other thing I'll come back to is what I said at the start is issues that we saw come up in submissions this year had a big impact on where our submitters were from. So the Milne Sutherland's intersection and the Edgware Pool really saw a large number of submitters from those areas. So again, if we do those ward breakdowns with the rates, they're going to show that as well. And like Peter just said, it isn't representative of the thoughts of the whole city. So caution would be my advice, use them with caution.
Right, okay, that's interesting, thank you.
Jake.
I didn't actually have my hand up, but I do have a question as it happens. Thank you for providing what you did provide in terms of looking at it per ward by ward and how many on each category of things. I guess for future, what would be really useful as a decision maker to know is, are cycleways equally popular or unpopular across different wards or different parts of the city? It's those sorts of questions, and how roading is viewed in different parts of the city. That would be not just the numbers on the subject, but that kind of more in-depth analysis. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah. Again, we can provide that, but I would just caution how you use and interpret that, because where those submitters come from do have an impact, and we don't get submissions in a number that's representative of the whole city.
Totally appreciate that this is just one view into the public's mindset. Elections are another, and just BAU as well. So
Yeah, Mike and Andrew.
Thank you. I'll use this slide as an example. Am I right to say that the support is people that actually agree with our proposal, but the opposed could be they don't, so therefore they may want less, or they could want more?
So if they want less or more, they usually go into the other because they're providing other proposals. Okay. The opposed are the ones who straight up oppose but don't provide any more.
But is that true for everything?
Yeah.
You sure?
Yeah. So what we often do as well is if they oppose and provide an alternative, we'll double code them. So they can go into oppose, they oppose the proposal, but we'll also split them out, and where they've given us an alternative, put it into other, so that we get the number of other proposals that we're getting.
So if someone says they don't want to have the cycleways deferred, they become an oppose?
Yes. No. Yes, they do. They become an oppose because they have opposed what we're proposing. Does that make sense? So when we code them based on what we've got in our annual plan. If they support it, then they support the proposal. If they oppose the proposal, they go into oppose. If they've provided an other view or proposal, they also go down into there.
I think as councillors read the submissions themselves, they will get the flavour and the sense of.
So we code them out.
To me, there's a slight issue because we put some black and white figures up there that says. So if we look at the cycleways, it says 21% opposed. But if you actually read through the submissions, it's very clear that probably a chunk of those are actually opposing because they want us to do a lot more. So it creates, I guess, a little bit of.
So that's where it's really important to read it as they don't oppose cycleways, they oppose our proposed spend.
Yes.
Yeah, because
So it can go.
It does.
That's where some of the
I actually think that, okay, but now that I'm listening to the way that this is being presented, maybe could we just do a bit more of a dive into those figures so that we get an analysis of and a breakdown of what, you know, what people are specifically saying, that they oppose because they want more, they oppose because it's been brought forward, they oppose because, you know, it's been pushed back, you know, like just so that you get a flavour of the submissions that have been received on it.
And that's the detail that's in that detailed document as well. So the thematic analysis does have more detail on that.
Yeah.
It's just,
excellent. But that's not what we're presenting to the public right now. We're presenting something that's quite black and white, and it just has a label of percentage.
Yeah.
I think
We're not going to have every member of the public that might be watching this actually deep diving into the detail of the submissions, which are all publicly available as well. So I just think that it might be useful to do a document because it is an issue. So
if I could just draw members' attention, I think you're raising a absolutely legitimate issue. But if we look at the issue around frustration and cycleways, it actually does state large number of submitters provided alternative feedback and proposals. And under cycleways, it states new infrastructure areas city where it's not currently planned for, improving local connections to major cycleways and networks. I think what you've got to be able to then do is tell the next bit of the story. So it is there on this sheet, but the public won't have necessarily, well, they won't have seen the presentation. They can now see that, but you want the further detail below that.
Yeah, you almost want a support plus.
Yes,
Like,
and we can
instead
work-
of oppose, it should be support but want more.
yeah,
I think one thing we need to do is be crystal clear when we introduce these figures that oppose does not mean they oppose the service.
no.
They're opposing what we currently propose to do, not the service.
Do
They're
not
opposed to.
underestimate people's capacity to misrepresent the figures that are in front of us. So I just think that it would be helpful to everyone that we have the
Yes.
information presented as in terms of the way. I'd like to carry on though. Andrew and then Yanni and then back to Aaron again.
Thank you. So this table of submissions, page 9 of our presentation, there are some things obviously that you've called out from there as key issues that people submitted on. So just drilling down into roads, 157 submissions, 89% other. Now, my understanding from some counting that other people have done is that over 100 of those submissions on roads were on the Sparks Milne Sutherland's intersection. That isn't called out as a specific area of submissions in the written list. Have you got any comment on the number of submissions on that particular issue? Do you know, for example, the exact number, or are you able to give some guidance there? And just checking that they are the ones that are coded in other, which is why that number's so high.
yeah.
Just while Amy's doing that, I'd just like to make a brief point that some of this stuff is a little bit of a statistician's nightmare in the sense that we have an annual plan with a relatively small number of submissions, and within them, they're extremely lumpy about topics and geography. So if someone doesn't know what they're doing or wants to skew the numbers, that combination is relatively easy to mess around with. Small sample size and quite lumpy is not really statistically a sound basis to draw some conclusions from.
So within the roads submissions, there was 55 on the Milne Sparks Sutherlands, which are in the other, and there was around 30 on spending in the east. So those two things together make up half of those submissions. The 11% in the support was just general support for what we've got, and the 7% was opposed, and then the remainder was just bits and pieces that we couldn't really group together into a bigger category. So that's the key thing with this. We're really looking for those high level themes, not every little bit and piece. But those Milne Sparks Sutherland's ones did make up a big chunk of the roads. Some of them also went into footpaths and streetscapes and cycling infrastructure where they didn't necessarily talk about the intersection itself, but they talked about some of the infrastructure around the intersection. So footpaths not being able to get to the Hallswell Village and the services down there and cycleways as well, where the cycleway stops pretty close to that intersection. So there were a lot of submissions on that area, but 55 of them directly were about that intersection on the road.
Yanni, and then Aaron again, Jimmy, and then Anne.
How much feedback did you get on the excess water charges?
Not much, very little. In fact, I think it's so little that it's not actually in here this year.
Because we had people come and talk to us, like one of the verbal submissions was definitely...
Yep. So I think it came up more in the verbal submissions than it did in the written. Off the top of my head, I think there was less than 10 on the excess water charge. It was not very many at all. So when I wrote the thematic analysis, I looked at where the counts were, and anything above 20 sort of got grouped up into themes, and anything below there didn't. So it definitely wasn't in those top things that we heard about this year.
But it's not like it's not a popularity contest, is it? It's kind of what the ideas that people put forward, and the the kind of the rationale behind what they're asking for, right?
So when we do the thematic analysis, what we're looking for is things that have come up commonly, so common themes essentially across a large number of submissions. And I think the feedback on the excess water charge, there wasn't very much of it, and it's really what you've heard before as well.
So just one thing that, and I noticed that some submitters came this year who'd come the previous year and said they were grateful for the staff response to questions as part of developing their submissions. But I guess if you go to the final slide that we had around the resident survey, you still see people, 50% lower satisfaction, decision making, having a say, processes are easy to use. And one of the kind of observations I've made is that the capital program, the changes were kind of highlighted, but the whole LTP wasn't. So if you went onto the bubble diagram, unless you could find a change project, you couldn't find other projects. So I just wonder if you've had any reflection on how people access the information, how people sort, and I know again, like to acknowledge that we had submitters that did praise us, but did you get any sense of people how they found the process? And I guess the other question is, I really appreciate the demographic data that you've provided, but really concerned that we're not hearing from young people, and if we did anything to connect with young people, or whether we, if there's anything that we should be looking at going forward.
So in terms of what we heard about the process, specifically through the submissions, there were some comments from people who commented on the process that we asked for some improvements last year, and we can see that you've made those, and we really appreciate that, but we still think there's a few things that you could improve on. And then there were some comments from others that they don't feel that the process allows them to engage in a way that is meaningful to them. So they struggle to get through the information and want to be able to provide feedback, but they find it challenging. So there was a mixture of feedback on that, but I think where we have made changes, people are noticing them and they're commenting on them. In terms of the young people, I don't know if Lynn wants to. Young people. So the young people issue is one that we're seeing across everything we do, and we know it's a challenge, and it is something that we're actively trying to work on. So we've been doing a little bit of engagement around our wider research program with some young people, but there wasn't necessarily anything specific done for this annual plan.
Right. And just a final question from me around the general report back is that there were one or two submitters that raised concerns that they'd raised things previously and they still hadn't been addressed. I went back through the LTP and there was a number of things that we've agreed, and some things we agreed after the LTP, separate resolutions. But is there any sort of reporting around what we've agreed to do as part of the last year's LTP in response to submissions, and how we can see the progress on that? Because for example, take the water sediment issue. We did put money on to address sedimentation issues last year, but people still came and said, we're concerned. And I just wonder whether there's a way that we can kind of see very clearly and report back to community around here's what we actually agreed last year and here's the progress we've made, accepting that we're in, unique times with COVID and I know we've had a lot of disruption.
I don't really know on the face of it how to answer that. If a decision's made outside the LTP on a specific issue, normally the officer in charge would keep council across whether it's working or not. Sometimes the council has done what it's said it would do, but the community may not know that. That's the other side of it, is the communication of it. So I guess it's case by case and item by item, but I hear what you're saying about report back on ad hoc decisions, and I guess we have to go away and figure out how that could be swept up in a meaningful way rather than officer by officer. Certainly everything in the LTP is reported on, but decisions made after on an ad hoc basis are not really structured. So I guess we need to figure out how to do that and then also come back to you on whether or not we've been successful in doing it or we just haven't told people that we've done it.
Yeah. So, to give you one clear example, we passed a resolution to consider a number of parks, and then the second thing we did, and another thing we did is we request staff to report on establishing a free central city passenger transport service, including options for potential interim measures to support revitalisation of central city. The agreed action, as I understand, was staff will develop information to inform the FY23 annual plan. This will include the following. So,
but isn't that what the action tracking for council support actually does? I'm not trying to push back. I'm simply saying I thought that the action tracking actually tracked actions like that to see whether they've been completed.
Yeah, okay. I see that we've got a response in the questions. I think, I don't know, yesterday or today or the 23rd around transport issues that have been raised.
Right.
But it feels like people have come back again to ask for something that we've already agreed to do, and that the information's only been provided because of it being asked for again this year rather than actually the resolution that we'd already passed to do it.
Perhaps the best thing would be if maybe I could meet with you and the council support staff and just see whether the action tracking system that they've got is actually doing what you need it to do.
Okay, thanks.
I think the other thing with the submissions is often we do see people, even though it's there and it's budgeted for, we see them submitting in support of it just to reinforce that they really want that done. So that's the other reason why some of these things might come up in submissions and answers.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think Yanni's raising the point that, if this is a light touch on a LTP, but we're referencing back to the LTP, the resolutions that came from the council as part of the LTP to be reported as part of this, that should have been quite front-facing at the beginning of the process. And I guess what Yanni's saying, was it? And I don't know the answer to that question. So was the follow-up, were the resolutions that required us, organisation to provide advice, for example, on that particular issue that Yanni raised, were all of the resolutions, were they tracked into the beginning of the annual plan process so that we could at least respond to them at the beginning of the process? So I just don't know the answer to that question.
Or people could make submissions based on the information that's provided to inform the decision making.
Look, I believe that they were tracked as actions and factored into the start of the process. I'll go back and just audit that, make sure that we haven't lost anything. But I will say, echoing Amy, quite often people resubmit on something that they've submitted on before and is in train, either because they want to double guarantee that it will happen or that it is in the LTP and we're going to do it. It just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. But the specific resolution that Yanni mentioned was that a report would be provided to council so they could make a decision as part of this annual plan process. Well, obviously, if we were going to consult on it, that would have had to have been provided prior to the beginning of the process.
We'll have to look into that one, but what I do know is that we have a very thorough system for tracking every action, every resolution made by council.
Yeah, no.
So we just need to see how that works.
When I first arrived, there's no question.
And we did get just to be fair. We did get a memo in December 21, and it had recommendations to defer. But I just don't recall it coming as a report for an actual decision making. But I mean, maybe I'm.
But it might have been part of the informal. That's the question that I'm asking. Was it part of the beginning process? Because I mean, we had a public-facing briefing prior to the beginning. You know, at the beginning of this annual plan process.
We did, December
Lynn's
14.
going to provide some advice.
If I could just add and remind councillors that one of the things that we did do very explicitly at the beginning of the draft annual plan was to reconnect with community boards and make sure that all of those priorities specifically were included in the consideration for the draft annual plan. So members of ELT met with community boards in their meeting rooms, and we also did a trawl through the annual plan, the LTP outcomes. It is possible that some things were missed, so I think it's a very good reminder. We need to go back and do a double check on those resolutions and ensure that the action tracking process is working properly.
Yep.
But there was a genuine and I think quite strong engagement with community boards to ensure those priorities were restated and reconfirmed before we finalised the draft plan.
Yeah. I think Yanni's raised another point, so perhaps before you go, that I'm concerned about. So Yanni raised the fact that, we had a very strong and powerful submission on the excess water charges relating to the advice that we'd provided or not provided, and the number of households that do or don't have the ability to participate fully in the scheme because of the nature of the meters that they have. We also received advice from staff, I believe, in terms of how clearly the process had made some difference with people acknowledging their process, but acknowledging that they would have got a high bill, and so therefore that had gone looking and they'd found leaks and things like that, which is all good stuff. And if you go online and you're one of the good ones, then you get a, yay, you're a good person because you're doing well, and then other ones sort of say, this is the bill you would have got. I'm worried that there are thousands of people out there who don't know. So we didn't draw people's attention to it. So that's why we didn't get many submissions on it, because it wasn't mentioned in the consultation document. It went through. And I have a degree of nervousness about allowing it to come into play while we still have a degree of uncertainty in that regard. So, and I think that, Yanni's made the point that it might be one person that made the submission, but I think all of us heard what that person said and had a quite a powerful reaction to it. And I'm not necessarily persuaded that we should bring the excess water charges in immediately. I think that we need to know a lot more information about the level of understanding that's out there. We could actually use it as a tool to get people to reduce their water usage over the key periods by saying this is the bill that you would have got, and if it's somebody that's actually then doing the right thing and fixing things, maybe we should have a competition of some sort that puts the ones who are doing it well into a drawer to more the carrot approach while we get to the position. Because essentially, if the water service entities take over, they'll bring in volumetric charging for drinking water and wastewater. I still haven't got it in my head how they'll pay for stormwater, but that's another issue that I'm still debating with officials. But in terms of drinking water and wastewater, changes are coming. So if that is the case, are we doing our residents a favour by not using a carrot rather than a stick?
So perhaps I can make some general comments about this. First of all, the main consultation on excess water charging was part of the long-term plan. So we have gone and consulted at the level of principle, and the decision was made as part of that process to move to implementation. During the course of the last year, there's been a comprehensive project plan which looks into all of the groups of residents who are differentially impacted by this. And we had a conversation at ELT yesterday, going through systematically and understanding what those impacts are, the ways in which we can best communicate with people, and in some cases, particularly very heavy users, it's very clear that there's a leak, and we need to work with those people to ensure that that is addressed. We also have a range of initiatives for each of the other groups, and what we'd like to offer is a further briefing to councillors to ensure that you have full assurance that we are taking very much cognizance of the potential impacts and that we're taking that educational and supportive approach. So that is the plan, and I'm going to suggest that rather than spend a lot of time today on an annual plan...
I don't want us to discuss it today.
We can come back to you
I've got
with...
a whole stack of people who now want to speak because of it. I wanted to make the point that Yanni had raised a good point, which was when one person sits at the end of that table and they make a statement that makes us sit up and notice, then because it wasn't included in the consultation document, we shouldn't be reflecting back that there wasn't an overwhelming number of submissions that focused on that issue. So that was the point that I was trying to make. Mm-hmm. One submitter can make a difference in terms of arresting the process through grabbing our attention. And I think that's actually a really powerful message to send. Go back to the resident survey, because the resident survey, those 50% or lower satisfaction, that one, the resident survey.
Sorry, up or down?
You were on it. Go back. Yeah, there. So, decision making, having a say, and processes easy to use. Having a say. I want people to know that when they sit at the end of the table, they can have a say. So, and that's the point that I'm making. So I'm not saying that we'll make the decision today, and we're not going to debate it today. So I don't want to have a discussion about excess water charges today. But we are going to ask staff to come back to us before we consider signing off on this plan. So I've got Aaron, Jimmy, Anne, Sam, Tim, and Sarah.
It was like listening to an angel sing for a moment there. Now, I
do better with my mask on.
You're well on your game this morning, Mayor. My question was the opposed and support and other. Can you have a foot in more than one camp? Obviously, you can. Okay, because there wasn't many 100%. They were generally 1/7s, 1/8s.
So if someone says that I support this part, but I oppose this part, we'll split it up and put it where it needs to go. Same with the other.
That makes sense.
So we really break those submissions down into where they need to be.
Yeah, because I think for the small number of the public that would actually be interested in following this, they would not be able to work that out. So thank you.
When I calculate those percentages, I take them and I calculate them on the number of submitters. So X number of submitters, they might have more than 1 point. So that's often why some of the percentages will add up to more than 100.
Brilliant, thank you.
Jimmy?
Thank you, Mayor. On page 9, and category, we have a number of submissions, but if we accumulate, its total is 365. But staff mentioned actually we received those submissions more than 500. So what's the difference? The other one is I'm concerned, for instance, these slides and also the page 10, those the age-aware poor receive 170 submitters. But if age-aware poor should be under the page 9 community facility, but in here only received 11 the submissions. So I just get lost, what's the difference?
So when we code, we have a coding schedule that we code to, and because we thought that we would get a lot of submissions on Edgeware Pool, we put it in its own category. So that's why it's sitting independently of the community facilities. The community facilities tended to be more around the halls and community centres. Rec and Sport also has its own category for things like pools. So that's where the categories that we break them down into are quite important. It just enables us to get into more detail than we'd otherwise be able to be if we just put everything into community facilities. In terms of those numbers and why they don't add up to 500, not all submitters will comment on all topics. So we take a submission comes in and it's a written document, and we take that and we break it down into the different topics. So this is just the people who commented on those topics.
Jimmy, it can be quite complex because as someone who responds to submissions, they're almost never about an even range of topics and consistently for or against. They're generally all over the show. I like this, I don't like that, I won't talk about that thing, but I will talk a lot about that other thing. And breaking that down statistically is complex, and it means that not everything adds up to 100.
So we're taking written bits and we're trying to get numbers out of them for you. So that's why we code them the way that we do. And the reason we use the support, the pose and the other is it's high enough that we can get things into the categories reasonably accurately, but it doesn't enable us some of those other levels of detail that you've talked about.
Okay, second question is, I still also ask this question, 50% or lower satisfaction. Actually, this information is kind of thematic analysis, summarized, am I right? But still have breakdown to each individual one. For instance, like a routing, like a full pass, still speak, the submitter also focus on which the specific routing or full pass need to improve.
So this one's a little bit different, the resident survey. So this is the one that measures our levels of service. So we have levels of service for all of those services, and we go out and we ask every year people who are on site using some of the services, but also what we call the general service satisfaction survey, where we ask a representative sample of Christchurch residents what they think about those services. So that's how we come up with those, and there is a thematic element to them, but generally for all of those services we have levels of service which we've measured, and that's how we get the 50% or lower satisfaction.
Sorry, just to clarify, there's a difference between the submission statistics and the resident survey. The submission statistics are just those who submitted on the annual plan, so a relatively small number. The surveys are much broader, well into the thousands, and are representative of wards, geography, and so forth. That's how they're structured. Yeah. So this is actually, if you like, much deeper, more representative data than submitters.
So for the resident survey this year, we spoke to about 7,500 residents across the program.
Okay, thank you.
I've got Anne.
Yeah, kia ora, thank you. And, it's incredibly complex, and we appreciate the work that you do and the way that you are able to explain it clearly. Thank you. This is a public briefing, obviously. Is this the first time that submitters will have seen this information? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's presented in the same way as we did for the LTP last year, so it should be becoming a format that is consistent and recognisable, but this is the first time they've seen this year's.
So there has been a wee bit of discussion about people have asked for information about submissions, as you all know,
Yep.
and what is the reason that people can't get that information before now?
So it takes us a while to do the numbers.
Yeah.
Submissions close and we get a lot in a big rush at the end.
Yes.
And we have to code all of those down. So there's about a week of doing that, and then they go up for managers' responses and that comes back, and then we build up the final reports. So it's a bit of a process to actually get to the point where we have those numbers, I think is something to be conscious of. And then again, we get the high level numbers, and then I do some of those sub-theme breakdowns. So again, it's just trawling.
It's a timing thing.
It is a timing thing.
So what's happening today is the transparency in terms of information, which is what people would like. I just think the last question, the excellent feedback that we get from staff to our questions about the AP issues that we have, when can that be shared, that information from staff?
That's probably a Lynn question.
Because there's such good information, it does give reasons and understanding about issues that have been raised.
Maybe I can help here. Just on the first one, unlike, say, phone calls at the customer service centre, there's no software that does this kind of breakdown automatically. It's actually manual, where someone has to sit there and read someone's submission and go, that's edgeware, that's chlorine, that's stray dogs. It's a manual process. And when you multiply that by 500 times 6 items, it gets complex. So there's the reason for the delay after the submissions close. In terms of when the public has access, we really, I think, need to actually get quality officer responses before they can be public, because seeing the submission but not the staff response isn't that really that helpful. So the time limit will always be constrained by how quickly we can get quality responses from managers as a group and say, right, they're now fit to go public. There's no transparency issue from staff's point of view about that going public. Really just a case of when is the officer responses and when are they ready to go.
Just to clarify, so on Monday the information we got from officers was confidential. And so that's the question really, is when can that then be released to, say, the community board who may want to know an answer from officers?
I'm not sure I can give an immediate answer, because I think that it's something that staff need to be comfortable with as a group. So I can't individually speak for everybody.
It'd be good to have an answer to that.
Councillor Galloway, I'd like to just reinforce what my staff have just said. Actually, it's an incredibly quick turnaround. With the volume that we get, actually the information that elected members get as part of their build-up in the briefings, we're literally building the plane and briefing you as we go along. And this, as we know, is our second time that we have briefed in public before you get anywhere near your decision meeting in June. But we will be providing the information in relation to the officer's response as part of an appendices to the public report.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Tim.
Yeah, look, just with regards to the water charging, I know you don't want a debate on it. It's really hard not to have a debate on it when comments are being made, but I think we do need a discussion as councillors around the table at some stage with regards to the three waters and how that will affect it, and what we're actually reminding ourselves what we're trying to achieve, and get on the same page. Because there's so much kind of going around. I think that it's going to change when three waters come in.
Yeah.
And I personally think we need to get it really under control and very clear what we're trying to achieve before the three waters comes in and why.
Yeah, no, that's agreed. Yeah. Sarah. Right. Look, thank you very much. And I mean, it has been a relatively quick turnaround. You know, I think submissions closed on the 18th of April, and here we are at the 25th of May. So it's literally a month and a bit after the closure, and you've presented a detailed analysis of the submissions. You've done it. We've heard done it manually. So on behalf of everyone, can I thank you and the team, Amy? Because you've done a tremendous job, and you're presenting us with information. So please don't take our responses as anything other than a conversation that we need to be having ourselves. So thank you very much.
And the feedback is actually really helpful for us as well. This is a document that never used to see the light of day. We've been creating it for a number of years, but it's now much more useful, and it just means that we can keep building on it every year to make it more useful.
The consultation document is way more user-friendly, and each time we are improving. So, congratulations on the steps that you've taken so far. And but our feedback from the residents, as we can see, is still work in progress. So, but good on you. Thank you. Right. The finances. Who was that, Leah?
Just while Leah's getting seated, thank you for those comments, because that month happened to fall over a time when all managers are involved in responding, and that's also when COVID was probably at its strongest in the organisation.
I know.
So, that will be appreciated by a lot of people.
Yeah, no, and I think, you know, I mean, Dawn was making a point, I think, about the number of staff that have been impacted by COVID. So we've been working in teams, you know, with you know, one team coming in 1 week and then the other team coming in the other week, and people working from home alternately to stop. But that ended with Easter. So you are talking about the time frame where things started to change, and there have been a number of people impacted by COVID.
Thank you.
So.
Do you want me to fly this?
Yeah, you go.